I'm Chloe. I'm 24 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my entire world went completely dark on a stage in front of 5,000 people. On the exact day I was supposed to deliver my valedictorian speech, an emergency room doctor looked at a scan and told my grandfather I had a massive tumor pressing violently against my frontal lobe. They had to cut my skull open immediately to save my life. The hospital called my parents. Not once, not twice, just endless ringing, echoing in a sterile hallway, going straight to voicemail. 4 agonizing days later, I finally opened my eyes. I was trapped in a cold room that smelled sharply of bleach and antiseptic, my bruised hands tangled in IV tubes, my head shaved and heavily bandaged. But the very first thing I saw wasn't my mother crying by my bed. It was a glowing screen, an Instagram post from my older sister. There they were, my entire family, smiling perfectly in front of the golden ruins of the Colosseum in Rome. They were holding gelato, looking absolutely radiant. The caption read, "Family trip in Rome. Finally no stress, no drama. Blessed." I didn't cry. I didn't leave an angry comment. I didn't call to beg for their love. I just locked my phone and stared up at the bright, blinding hospital ceiling, letting the crushing silence of the ICU swallow me entirely. I stayed a ghost to them, right up until 82 missed calls from my father exploded across my screen, followed by a frantic, terrified text. "We need you. Answer immediately." But looking at those words, my heart didn't flutter with hope. I knew the cold truth. They weren't calling because they missed me. They weren't calling because they realized their youngest daughter had almost died on an operating table. They were calling because they were terrified. Because someone had finally threatened the one and only thing they actually loved. Before I continue, if you find this story worth hearing, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to hear how this ends. And if you're watching right now, drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time it is there. Now let me take you back 5 weeks ago to the day everything started falling apart. 5 weeks before graduation, I was standing in my childhood kitchen, gripping the edge of the cold granite island. A strange, heavy pressure was building right behind my forehead, a dull throb that made the bright kitchen lights feel like needles. I ignored it. I was used to ignoring my own pain. Across from me, my mother was flipping through a massive stack of glossy wedding magazines. The heavy pages slapped against the counter, echoing in the quiet room. The magazines weren't for me, of course. They were for Jessica. My older sister had just gotten engaged to Brandon, a guy whose family name was printed in gold letters on the side of local bank branches. Overnight, our entire house had become a shrine to her timeline. "Chloe, can you pick up the custom napkin samples from the printer tomorrow?" Mom didn't look up. Her manicured finger traced the lace edge of a designer gown on the page. She didn't ask, she ordered. "Jessica is far too busy with dress fittings, and I have a mandatory meeting with the florist." I shifted my weight, my legs trembling slightly from a 10-hour shift at the coffee shop. I smelled like roasted beans and burnt milk. "I have finals, Mom. I really need to study." "You'll manage," she said smoothly, turning the page. "You always do." That was the curse of being the reliable one. Everyone just assumed you would handle the weight of the world without dropping it. For 5 years I had been working 30 hours a week, maintaining a 3.9 GPA, and paying my own tuition through a stressful patchwork of academic scholarships and double-shift tips. Meanwhile, Jessica's entire education, every class, every textbook, every sorority fee was funded by our parents, no questions asked. Whenever I dared to bring up how hard it was to survive on 3 hours of sleep, Dad would just cross his arms, look at me with a perfectly blank expression and say, "It builds character, Chloe. Jessica isn't as resilient as you." Resilient. It was just a fancy, polite word for someone they didn't have to worry about. The pressure behind my eyes pulsed harder, a sharp warning spike. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to sound light and casual to hide the desperate hope underneath. "Mom, I actually wanted to talk to you about graduation. I need to get something to wear for the ceremony. Maybe we could go shopping this weekend. Just the two of us?" Mom finally looked up. Her eyes met mine for exactly 1 second before drifting right back to the silk dresses on the page. Her jaw tightened in that familiar way that meant I was becoming an inconvenience. "Sweetie, you're so good at finding deals online," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I'm sure you'll figure something out. I really need to focus on your sister's engagement party. It's in 3 weeks, and the caterer is being impossible. But graduation is important, Mom. I'm Chloe." Her tone snapped like a frozen branch, slicing right through my sentence. She closed the magazine flat, a micro-expression of deep annoyance flashing across her face. "Your sister is bringing her fiancé's parents, the Hastings. Everything needs to be absolutely perfect. Your graduation is just a walk across a stage. I nodded. I always nodded. The lump in my throat felt like swallowed glass. I turned around and walked away, the floorboards of my childhood home creaking under my feet like a warning. Later that evening, the shadows in the house grew long and cold. I was in my old room, folding my faded work aprons, when the sound of Mom's voice drifted up the stairs. She was on the phone with her friend Susan. Oh, the graduation. Yes, she's valedictorian. Can you believe it? There was a pause, followed by a light, breathy laugh that made my stomach twist. But honestly, the timing is just terrible. Jessica's engagement party is that same week, and obviously that takes priority. Chloe understands. She's always been so independent. I stopped folding. My hands dropped to my sides. I stared at my pale reflection in the bedroom mirror. Independent. That was the word they used when they really meant forgettable. That night the house was entirely silent, except for the faint, distant hum of the air conditioner. I sat on my bed in the dark, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. I dialed the only person who actually ever asked how I was doing. Grandpa Arthur picked up on the second ring. Chloe, I was just thinking about you. The tight, heavy knot in my chest suddenly loosened. Hey, Grandpa. Tell me everything, his voice rumbled, warm and steady. How are finals? How's the speech coming along? Are you eating properly? Or just surviving on that coffee shop inventory? I pressed the phone harder against my ear. For the next 30 minutes, the cold walls of my room seemed to melt away. I let my guard down. I talked about my thesis on modern literature. I explained the 8 different drafts of my speech, and the terrifying weight of standing in front of thousands of people. I didn't mention the strange, creeping headaches. Chloe, Grandpa said when my words finally slowed. His tone shifted, dropping the lightheartedness. A serious, quiet edge crept in. Do you have your dress yet? Shoes? Do you need anything? I can send you a check right now. My throat tightened. The pride I wore like armor instantly went up. I'm fine, Grandpa. Really, I have some money saved from the cafe. He was quiet. It was a heavy, knowing silence. He heard the exhaustion in my voice, the tiny crack in my brave front. He knew I wouldn't take his money. But he wasn't going to push. Your grandmother would be so proud of you. He finally said, his breath hitching slightly. You know that, right? She always said you had her spirit. I only knew Grandma Margaret from stories and faded photographs. But staring into my mirror earlier, I knew what they meant. The same dark, wavy hair. The same intense, stubborn eyes. I'll be there, Chloe. Front row. I wouldn't miss it for the world, he said firmly. And Chloe, I have something for you. A gift. Your grandmother set it aside for you before she passed. She made me promise to give it to you when you graduated college. I've been holding on to it for 24 years. Before I could even process the weight of his words, my bedroom door violently slammed open. Jessica burst in without a single knock. A wave of sickeningly sweet, expensive floral perfume filled the air, choking the small space. Chloe, did you use my dry shampoo? I can't find it anywhere, and Brandon is picking me up in 10 minutes. Her eyes darted around my room, furious and panicked over a bottle of spray. I covered the phone receiver with a trembling hand. I don't use your stuff, Jessica. She narrowed her eyes, her lips pressing into a thin, annoyed line. She aggressively flipped her hair back, her left hand coming up high. The massive diamond engagement ring caught the dim bedroom light, flashing blindingly. It wasn't an accident. She wielded that ring like a weapon meant to keep me in my place. Whatever, she huffed, rolling her eyes. She paused at the door, glancing at me like I was a stranger taking up space in her hotel. Oh, congratulations on the valedictorian thing, I guess. She vanished. The door clicked shut, leaving the cold air behind. I slowly uncovered the receiver. Grandpa had heard every single word. The silence on the line spoke volumes. He didn't offer fake sympathy or try to excuse her behavior. Just focus on your speech, kiddo, he said softly, a deep sadness in his voice. I'll see you soon. 2 weeks before graduation, I was running on 5 hours of sleep, 4 cups of dark roast and pure concentrated spite. The espresso machine hissed and spat behind me as I wiped down the counter. Rent was due and I absolutely refused to ask my parents for a dime. The last time I did, 3 years ago, Dad sighed heavily and said, "We'll cover it this once, but you need to budget better. We have Jessica's sorority fees this month." I never asked again. My head had been pounding for 4 days straight. It wasn't a normal headache. It felt like a dull, heavy stone was sitting right behind my forehead, pressing violently against the back of my eyes. My phone vibrated on the stainless steel counter. "Mom," I answered, keeping the phone wedged between my shoulder and ear. "Hey, Chloe, I need you home this weekend. The engagement party is Sunday, and I need help with the setup. The event planners need direction." Her voice was fast, breathless, completely ignoring the fact that it was 11 p.m. and I was still at work. "Mom, I'm working. If I miss a shift, I can't make rent." "Call in sick," she snapped. No hesitation. No empathy. "Jessica needs you." I gripped the wet rag so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart hammered against my ribs. What about what I need? Silence. A cold, dismissive silence that stretched over the line, freezing my blood. Then, a sigh. "Chloe, don't be dramatic. It's one weekend. Your sister only gets engaged once. And I only graduate college once." My brain screamed. Valedictorian. 5 years of perfect grades while working myself to absolute exhaustion. But my throat locked. I never fought back. I just absorbed the hit. "Fine. I'll be there." I hit end call. The moment the screen went black, a sharp, blinding stab of agony ripped through the front of my skull. It was so intense my breath vanished. The cafe violently tilted to the left. I reached for a ceramic coffee mug on the drying rack to steady myself, but my fingers wouldn't close. My brain sent the command, but my body refused to listen. I watched in slow-motion horror as the mug slipped from my grip. It hit the tile floor, shattering into a dozen white pieces. My left hand, the hand that dropped it, suddenly vanished from my awareness. It was entirely numb, tingling with cold pins and needles, like it belonged to a dead body. "You okay?" My coworker Taylor rushed over, her eyes wide with shock, her boots crunching over the broken ceramic. I grabbed my left wrist with my right hand, panic rising in my chest like floodwater. My analytical brain raced, trying to diagnose the failure. Drop in blood pressure. Nerve compression from lifting heavy milk crates? I shook my hand aggressively, praying for the feeling to return. Slowly, painfully, a burning sensation crawled back into my fingertips. "Yeah," I gasped, forcing a tight, unconvincing smile. "Just dizzy." I stood up too fast. I told myself it was just a pinched nerve. Just final exam stress. Because if it was anything else, I didn't have the time or the money to survive it. On the dark drive back to my apartment, the streetlights bled into long yellow streaks across my windshield. The heater was broken, and the cold air creeping through the vents matched the freezing dread settling in my stomach. Suddenly, the road disappeared. It wasn't a blink. My vision simply tore in half, blurring into a terrifying gray fog. A horn blared loudly behind me. Panic seized my chest. I blindly gripped the steering wheel, my tires harshly scraping against the concrete curb as I violently swerved to the shoulder of the road. I slammed on the brakes, throwing the car into park. I sat there in the heavy silence, my heart hammering violently against my ribs, gasping for air as if I had been running. For 3 agonizing seconds, I was entirely blind. Then, just as suddenly, the streetlights swam back into focus. While I sat there, shaking and trying to convince myself I wasn't dying, the cold cabin of my car lit up with a harsh blue glow. A text from Jessica. "Don't forget to pick up the custom napkins tomorrow morning, and wear something nice on Sunday. Brandon's parents judge everything." I stared at the screen. Not, "How are you?" Not, "Thanks for helping." Just orders. A list of demands for a sister she treated like hired help. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the center console. "Dad, this time, can you pick up Aunt Diane from the airport Saturday at 3? Mom and I are busy with Jessica's party prep." I leaned my heavy head against the cold steering wheel. My hands were trembling uncontrollably in my lap, and I honestly couldn't tell if it was from the lingering numbness of whatever had just happened to my brain, or the boiling, suffocating rage of being so deeply unloved. I am just a machine to them, I thought, closing my eyes. A machine that is quietly breaking down. The next evening, Sarah Jenkins showed up at my apartment unannounced. She didn't knock. She just used her spare key, pushing the door open and bringing the sharp scent of spicy Thai food into my stale, quiet living room. "You look like actual death," she announced, dumping the brown paper bags onto the kitchen counter. Her eyes, usually bright and joking, were narrowed and deeply worried. "Thanks. Love you too," I muttered, trying to force a light smile. It felt like my facial muscles were pulling against heavy weights. Sarah had been my best friend since freshman orientation. She was the only person who had ever seen me cry over my family's neglect. She was also brutally honest, a trait I both relied on and feared. "Chloe," she abandoned the food, marching over and planting herself right in front of me. Her arms crossed, her jaw set. She studied my face, watching the tiny exhausted twitch under my left eye. When is the last time you slept? And I mean actually slept, without waking up at 3 a.m. to study or panic over rent. I sleep, I lied, looking away. Liar. She stepped closer, her voice dropping into a tense whisper. I talked to Taylor. She said you almost passed out at work yesterday. She said you dropped a mug and couldn't feel your own hand. What is going on with you? I was just dizzy, I snapped, the defensive wall instantly going up. It's final exam stress. The pity in her eyes hurt more than the anger. Chloe, you're destroying yourself for people who won't even show up to your graduation. They're coming to graduation, I said quickly. Too quickly. I opened my mouth to argue further, to defend them the way I always did, but my throat closed. The truth was a bitter pill I couldn't swallow. Mom hadn't mentioned the ceremony in weeks. Dad kept forgetting the date. Jessica didn't even know I was valedictorian. They'll come, I whispered, but my voice sounded hollow, like an echo in an empty room. Sarah sighed, pulling out a chair and gently pushing a container of pad thai toward me. Babe, in 5 years they haven't come to a single award ceremony. Not one. Do you remember when you won that National Teaching Fellowship? You stood on that stage looking at the crowd for 10 minutes. Who was in the audience? You and Grandpa, I whispered, looking down at the table. Exactly. She reached across the cheap wood and took my bruised, coffee-stained hand. Her grip was grounding. Chloe, you do not have to keep setting yourself on fire to keep them warm, especially when they aren't even looking at the flame. My eyes stung. The walls of the apartment felt like they were pressing in. I blinked rapidly, staring fiercely at the ceiling, absolutely refusing to let the tears fall. That night, hours after Sarah had left, the apartment was totally silent. The only sound was the dripping of the bathroom faucet. I was standing in front of the sink, getting ready for bed, when the world suddenly fractured. My vision violently split in two. I gripped the cold porcelain edges of the sink, my knuckles turning white, staring in pure horror at 2 distorted versions of my pale ghost-like face in the mirror. Then the headache returned. It wasn't a throb this time. It was a screaming physical pressure right behind my forehead, as if something inside my skull was trying to claw its way out. I looked down at my right hand. I was holding a plastic stick with bristles on the end. I stared at it. My brain went entirely blank. A deep primal panic clawed at my chest. I didn't know what the object was called. Brush, teeth, stick. I forced my mind to search for the word, but the filing cabinet in my brain was locked. The silence in my head was deafening. It took a full, agonizing 10 seconds before the word finally clicked back into place. Toothbrush. I dropped it into the sink. I knew the medical term for the terrifying symptom I had just experienced, even if I couldn't name a simple object. Aphasia. My analytical mind raced. I was a literature major. Words were my entire life. Losing them meant something was catastrophically wrong with the left hemisphere of my brain. I need a doctor, I thought, my chest heaving with terrified breaths. I need to go to the emergency room right now. But the engagement party was tomorrow morning. If I went to the hospital now, I would ruin Jessica's perfect weekend. The event planners would be lost. Brandon's wealthy parents would judge the chaos. And Mom would never ever forgive me for stealing Jessica's spotlight with a medical emergency. The ingrained habit of making myself small won. I swallowed 3 ibuprofen dry, crawled into my cold bed, pulled the blankets over my head, and prayed to whatever was listening that I would wake up normal. In the dark, my phone lit up on the nightstand. A text from Sarah. If anything happens, call your grandpa. He's the only one who actually cares. I stared at the glowing letters until the screen faded to black. I didn't respond. But I didn't delete the message either. 7 hours. I had been on my feet for 7 straight hours, moving like a ghost through the edges of my sister's perfect life. The backyard looked like a movie set. Strings of warm golden fairy lights were wrapped around the thick branches of ancient oak trees, casting a soft, expensive glow over the manicured lawn. A 4-tiered fondant cake, which probably cost more than my entire semester's tuition, sat proudly on a silk-draped table. 50 guests in crisp cocktail attire were laughing, their crystal champagne glasses clinking together like tiny, sharp ice cubes. I stood in the shadows near the patio doors, holding a silver tray. As a literature major, I had read countless plays about tragedy and betrayal, but I had never realized I was living in one. I wasn't a character in this family's story. I was just a stagehand. No one asked how my exams went. No one asked about my valedictorian speech. Chloe, more champagne over here. Mom waved frantically from across the lawn. She was standing shoulder to shoulder with Brandon's mother, wearing a tight, forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. I grabbed another chilled bottle. My left arm felt incredibly heavy, dragging as if it were submerged in deep water. The pressure in my head was no longer just a headache. It was a physical weight, like a screaming radio dial turned all the way up to pure blinding static. Every step I took sent a shockwave of nausea through my stomach. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper, forcing the corners of my mouth up into a polite, empty smile. Jessica was holding court near the stone fountain. Brandon's arm was wrapped securely around her waist. She was 4 glasses of champagne deep, her cheeks flushed, looking absolutely radiant. "Everyone, this is my little sister," Jessica announced loudly, pulling me directly into the spotlight just as I reached out to pour the drinks. Her manicured hand gripped my wrist a little too tightly. "Chloe does literally everything around here. Seriously, I don't know what we'd do without her." A few scattered polite claps. Some patronizing smiles from Brandon's wealthy relatives. Then Jessica leaned in. Her voice dropped, but it carried just far enough for Brandon's parents to hear every single word. "She's so good at, helping out. She's going to be a teacher. Can you imagine? Wiping noses and dealing with bratty, dramatic teenagers for a living." Laughter rippled through the group. It was that light, dismissive, wealthy laughter that made you feel like you were 3 inches tall. I kept smiling. My facial muscles physically burned from the effort. "Oh, and she's graduating next week," Jessica added, waving her empty glass like a complete afterthought. "Val something. What's it called again?" "Valedictorian," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the rushing sound of blood in my ears. "Right," Jessica laughed, her massive diamond catching the fairy lights and flashing sharply in my eyes. "She's always been the smart one. But smart doesn't buy Louis Vuitton, does it?" More laughter. Brandon's mother gave me a look of mild, distant pity. I couldn't breathe. I murmured an excuse, backing away and retreating to the kitchen. I dropped the heavy bottle onto the granite counter, gripping the cold stone edge and squeezing my eyes shut. "Just breathe," I told myself. "Just survive the night." Through the kitchen window I noticed an older man standing alone on the patio, watching the scene. I recognized him immediately. Mr. Henderson, Grandpa Arthur's former business partner. His expression was completely unreadable. A hard, stony mask. But his eyes were fixed entirely on me. My phone vibrated violently against my hip. I pulled it out with trembling, numb fingers. A text from an unknown number. "Your grandfather should know how your family treats you." I looked up sharply. Through the glass, Mr. Henderson slowly raised his bourbon glass a fraction of an inch in my direction, then turned his back and walked away into the crowd. My chest tightened. It wasn't just in my head. Other people saw it. Outsiders saw the cruelty I had normalized for 24 years. A wave of profound, sickening humiliation washed over me, mixing dangerously with the pulsing sickness deep inside my skull. Hours later, the guests were gone. The house was painfully quiet. I was standing alone in the kitchen, elbow deep in burning hot, soapy water, carefully washing the delicate, gold-rimmed plates the caterers refused to touch. From the living room I could hear the faint sounds of my family cooing over professional engagement photos on a laptop. Footsteps approached. Mom walked in, her face flushed with wine and utter satisfaction. "Chloe, I have the most wonderful news." I didn't turn around. I focused on the soap bubbles sliding down the porcelain. "What is it?" "We're going to Rome. The whole family. Brandon's parents are treating us to celebrate the engagement. They rented a private villa." My hands instantly stopped moving in the water. The kitchen suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. "Rome? When?" "Next Sunday. We fly out Saturday night." "Saturday night? Graduation is Sunday morning, Mom." Slowly, agonizingly, I turned around. Hot water dripped from my yellow rubber gloves, splashing onto the hardwood floor in heavy, rhythmic drops. She waved her hand in the air, brushing the massive, life-altering conflict away like it was nothing but a pesky fly. "I know, sweetie, but the flights were already booked when we realized the date. Brandon got such a phenomenal deal and his parents are being so incredibly generous. You're missing my graduation. For a vacation." The words felt thick and foreign in my mouth. "Don't say it like that." Mom frowned, her perfect mood punctured. Her eyes hardened. "It's not just a vacation. It's for your sister. It's bonding with her future in-laws. It is crucial for her future. I am valedictorian, Mom. I have to give a speech in front of 5,000 people. And you'll be wonderful." She offered a bright, brittle, totally empty smile. "You don't need us there, Chloe. You've always been so self-sufficient. So strong. Jessica gets anxious if we aren't there to support her. She needs us. I stared at her. I stared at the woman who raised me, waiting for her to hear herself. Waiting for some hidden maternal instinct to finally kick in, for something behind her eyes to click and realize she was breaking my heart. Nothing did. Her eyes were totally blank, just slightly annoyed that my sadness was ruining her good news. As if summoned by the heavy, suffocating tension, Dad appeared in the doorway. He looked at the soapy water dripping onto the floor instead of looking at my face. "Chloe, your mother and I discussed it. Jessica needs family support right now. She's entering a completely new social circle. She needs us. And graduating valedictorian isn't a big life change," I asked. My voice finally cracked, trembling violently. "You're strong." Dad's voice was tired, deeply rehearsed. It was the same script they had used my entire life. "You don't need us the way your sister does. You'll go up there, give your speech, get your piece of paper, and you'll be fine." The room abruptly violently tilted. The white kitchen cabinets seemed to stretch and warp like melting plastic. A deafening ringing filled my ears. I let out a sharp gasp, dropping the sponge and grabbing the edge of the island counter to stop myself from crashing to the floor. "Chloe?" Mom's voice suddenly sounded very far away, echoing as if she were speaking to me from underwater. "You look incredibly pale. Are you being dramatic again?" "I'm fine," I choked out, unable to feel my left leg. "Early shift tomorrow. I need to go." I tore off the gloves and walked out before they could say another word. I don't remember the drive home. The world was a smear of dark shapes and blinding streetlights. When I finally reached my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight into the bathroom, turned on the shower, and sat on the cold tile floor in my clothes. The hot water beat down on my aching shoulders. In the absolute dark, with the roar of the water hiding my voice, I finally broke. I cried until my throat was raw, until my lungs burned, mourning the parents I realized I never actually had. 4 days before graduation, I was lying flat on the faded carpet of my apartment living room. Getting up felt like trying to lift a boulder off my chest. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the angry crackling sound of Sarah's voice through my phone's speaker. "They're skipping your graduation for a vacation." "A vacation, Chloe?" Sarah's voice was sharp, vibrating with a fierce, protective fury. "It's for Jessica's engagement," I whispered to the ceiling. My voice sounded thin, completely drained of life. "Bonding with the in-laws. It's a strategic move for her." "Chloe, stop making excuses for them." "I'm not making excuses, Sarah. I'm just accepting reality. Fighting it just hurts more." "That's worse. That is so much worse." I could hear Sarah pacing in her own apartment, her footsteps loud over the phone. I stared up at a water stain on my ceiling. It was shaped vaguely like a broken heart. It felt incredibly fitting. 5 years, Sarah continued, her voice suddenly cracking with emotion. 5 years you worked yourself half to death. You missed parties, you missed trips, you lived off cheap ramen, and 3 hours of sleep, and they can't postpone one single trip for 24 hours to watch you shine? Apparently not. She went quiet. When she spoke again, all the anger had drained out, leaving only a deep, terrified worry. "How are you feeling physically?" "I mean it, Chloe. You sounded really weird on the phone yesterday. You froze for a minute and forgot the word for car." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "I'm fine, Sarah. Really. Just tired. Just stressed about the speech." I lied, because telling her the truth meant going to the hospital, and going to the hospital meant missing the one day I had worked my entire life for. That night, my body finally forced the issue. I woke up at 4 a.m. in the dark. It wasn't a slow wake-up. I was jolted awake by the absolute worst agony of my entire life. It felt as though someone had driven a burning white-hot metal spike directly through my left eye and into the center of my brain. The pain was so absolute, so sudden and blinding, I actually screamed out loud into my pillow. I tried to stand up to get to the medicine cabinet, but the moment I put weight on my left leg, it gave out completely. It was just dead weight. I crashed onto the floor. Panting, sweating, and terrified, I dragged myself across the rough carpet with my right arm. Every inch was a battle. I pulled myself up using the bathroom doorframe and flipped on the harsh overhead light. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. Dark, purple bruises had formed under my eyes. My cheeks were hollow. My skin was a sickly pale gray. I looked like a ghost haunting my own life. My logical brain, the part that analyzed data and solved problems, screamed at me. "Call an ambulance. You are having a major neurological event." But the little girl inside me, the one who just wanted her family to be proud, argued back. The speech is in 4 days. If you go to the hospital now, they'll sedate you. They'll run scans. They'll keep you in a bed. You will miss the one moment that proves you matter. I slowly slid down the wall until I was sitting on the bath mat. I pulled my phone from my pajama pocket and opened my photos. My thumb shook violently as I scrolled past hundreds of pictures of Jessica's perfect life. Finally, I found it. A photo of Grandpa Arthur and me from last Christmas. He was the only one looking at the camera, the only one standing next to me. His strong arm was wrapped proudly around my shoulders, while the rest of the family in the background looked at Jessica opening gifts. I thought about what Sarah had said. If anything happens, call your grandpa. I opened my web browser, my vision swimming slightly, and logged into my university portal. I navigated to the emergency medical contact form. Primary contact, Richard Hayes' father. Secondary, Patricia Hayes' mother. I stared at their names. They were already packing their bags for Rome. They were already gone. With a trembling finger, I hit delete. Both names vanished from the screen. It felt like severing a heavy, suffocating cord. I typed carefully. Primary contact, Arthur Hayes, grandfather. Secondary, Sarah Jenkins. I saved the form, swallowed 3 more painkillers dry, and dragged myself back to bed. 4 more days, I chanted quietly in the dark. I just have to survive 4 more days. 2 days before graduation. The apartment was completely silent. I was sitting at my small desk, struggling to memorize the index cards for my speech. My vision kept tunneling, the black ink words swimming and crawling across the paper like tiny insects. My phone rang. The screen flashed. Grandpa Arthur. Chloe, are you ready for tomorrow? His voice was booming, full of life and a bright, infectious excitement. As ready as I'll ever be. I pressed the heel of my hand hard against my throbbing temple. Are you sure you can make it? I know the drive is long, and the weather might get bad. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, he said warmly. I could hear the smile in his voice. I'm leaving tonight. I booked a hotel near campus so I can be there early. I have that gift for you. The one from your grandmother. Grandpa, you really don't have to give me anything. Just having you there is enough. I want to. She knew you'd make it, Chloe. Even before you could speak, she knew. A heavy silence fell between us. A question had been burning in my chest for years. A question I had always been too afraid to ask. But standing on the edge of everything, the fear was gone. Grandpa. I hesitated, staring blindly at my speech cards. Can I ask you something? Why didn't you ever help with my tuition? Dad said you couldn't afford to help both of us, and that Jessica needed the money more because her degree was more demanding. Grandpa made a sudden, strange sound on the other end of the line, a sharp, furious intake of breath. It was followed by a bitter, dark, hollow laugh that sent a chill down my spine. Is that what he told you? That I couldn't afford it? Yeah. He said there wasn't enough to go around. Chloe, Grandpa said. His voice dropped an octave, vibrating with a suppressed, terrifying anger. When you and Jessica started college, I sat your father down. I offered to pay for both of your tuitions in full, every single penny. My breath hitched. What? Your father refused your portion, Grandpa said, each word sharp and deliberate. He told me he was handling yours. He said he wanted you to learn responsibility and grit, but that Jessica was delicate and needed the financial padding. He specifically ordered me not to give you a dime, claiming it would ruin his parenting strategy. I didn't know you were working 30 hours a week until last year, and when I confronted him about it, he threatened to legally cut me out of your life if I interfered. The room began to spin. Not from the tumor this time, but from pure, unadulterated betrayal. The air was sucked right out of my lungs. My own father had engineered my struggle. He had watched me exhaust myself for 5 years. He watched me panic over rent, watched me skip meals, watched me cry from sleep deprivation, just so he could fund Jessica's luxury lifestyle, without feeling a single ounce of guilt. He created a narrative of my resilience to excuse his blatant favoritism. Tomorrow, Grandpa said gently, sensing the absolute shock paralyzing my vocal cords. We'll talk tomorrow after the ceremony. I have something that bypasses your father entirely. For now, just know this, Chloe. You are not alone. You never were. Graduation morning, I woke up, and the world immediately punished me for it. The morning sun cutting through my blinds felt like a physical blow. I barely made it to the bathroom before I was violently sick. My head wasn't just aching anymore. It was a prison of white-hot agony. Every beat of my heart felt like a hammer striking the inside of my skull. I crawled back to my bed and checked my phone. One new text from Mom. Just landed in Rome. Have a great graduation, sweetie. So proud of you." Attached was a selfie. The whole family was standing at the Leonardo da Vinci airport. The Italian sun was golden behind them. Jessica was pouting perfectly for the camera. Her designer sunglasses pushed back on her head. Dad was giving a cheerful thumbs up. Mom was smiling like she didn't have a single care in the world, like she hadn't just abandoned her youngest daughter on the most important day of her life. I didn't respond. I didn't cry. I simply blocked her number. Then I blocked Dad's. Then I blocked Jessica's. Sarah picked me up at 10 a.m. When I opened my apartment door, she didn't say congratulations. She didn't even say hello. She just stopped dead in her tracks, her car keys dropping from her hand. "Chloe, you're gray," she whispered, her face turning pale. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning my face with clinical terror. "Look at me. Look at my nose." She held up a finger. "Your pupils, they're two different sizes. One is a pinprick, and the other is wide open. I'm not taking you to campus. I'm taking you to the ER. Now." "No." I grabbed her arm. My grip was desperately tight, my fingernails digging into her skin. "Sarah, please, let me do this. Let me have this one thing. After the speech, I promise, I will go straight to the hospital. I'll let you call the ambulance yourself. But let me have my moment first." Sarah stared at me, tears welling in her eyes and spilling over. She looked at the graduation gown hanging on the door, then back at my ghost-like face. "If you fall," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm calling 911, before you even hit the floor. Deal?" The university campus was a sea of chaotic joy. It was a world of bright floral bouquets, proud parents hugging their children, and cameras flashing everywhere. I kept my head down, my eyes fixed on the pavement, navigating the crowds like a ghost. Inside the staging area, the thick black fabric of the graduation gown felt suffocating, trapping the heat against my clammy skin. Then I saw him. Grandpa Arthur was in the very front row. He looked incredibly handsome in his best Sunday suit, his silver hair neatly combed. He saw me and waved, his face lighting up with a radiance that almost made the pain in my head disappear. In his lap he was clutching a thick weathered manila envelope. Next to him sat Sarah, her phone already out, her knuckles white as she gripped it. Beside them were two empty chairs, reserved for family. They sat there like open wounds, hollow, silent and mocking. "Chloe Hayes," a stage manager whispered, tapping my shoulder. "You're up. Good luck, valedictorian." 5,000 people. A literal ocean of faces stretched out before me under the blazing noon sun. I walked toward the podium, my left leg dragging slightly because it wouldn't fully cooperate. The stage lights were blinding, cutting into my skull like shards of broken glass. I gripped the edges of the wooden podium so hard I thought it might snap. I found Grandpa's face. He was beaming, leaning forward as if to catch every single word. I cleared my throat, the sound echoing through the massive stadium speakers. "Thank you all for being here today," I began. My voice sounded strange to me, distant, as if it were coming from someone else. "I stand before you not just because of grades or test scores, but because of the people who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." The words were right there on my cards. I had written them. I had memorized them. But suddenly my tongue felt like a heavy piece of lead. The horizon tilted violently to the right. The sea of faces blurred into a terrifying smear of colors. The pressure in my head reached its breaking point. It wasn't a snap. It was a white-hot explosion of sheer, unmitigated agony that dropped me to my knees. I heard my own voice echo one last time, slurred and broken. Believed couldn't. Then the microphone fed back with a deafening metallic screech as I hit the floor. I saw the sky spinning in circles. I saw Grandpa's face, his proud, beautiful smile shattering into a mask of absolute horror. I saw Sarah vaulting over the front row barrier, screaming my name. I saw those two empty seats one last time. My head bounced against the hard wooden stage. Screams. Thousands of people gasping, standing up, shouting. "Call 911. Is there a doctor in the stands? Don't move her. Stay back." Hands were on my face. Cold, shaking hands. Sarah's voice was hysterical, sobbing directly into my ear. "Chloe, Chloe, stay with me. Look at me. Squeeze my hand, please. Just squeeze my hand." I felt Grandpa's weathered, calloused hand grip mine. His voice was breaking, a sound of pure grief. "I'm here, sweetheart. Grandpa's here. Don't go. Don't you dare go." I tried to tell them I was okay. I tried to tell them I just needed to finish the speech. But no sound came out. The darkness was a heavy velvet blanket, pulling me under, deeper and deeper. The last thing I heard before my consciousness blinked out entirely was a paramedic's voice, sharp and urgent. "She's seizing. Frontal lobe trauma likely. We've got a massive neurological event here. We need family consent for emergency imaging. Where are the parents?" This next part of the story I didn't witness. My mind was completely submerged in the dark. But Sarah told me every agonizing detail later, her voice shaking, her hands tightly gripping mine in the quiet of the ICU. The ambulance ride took exactly 12 minutes. Sarah said it was 12 minutes of pure suffocating hell. I was seizing the entire way, my body violently thrashing against the tight straps of the stretcher. The paramedics were shouting medical codes she didn't understand, pushing IV lines into my veins while the sirens screamed through the city traffic. When they slammed through the double doors of the emergency room, everything moved at a terrifying, frantic speed. I was rushed straight into the MRI machine. 10 minutes later, a neurosurgeon walked out to the sterile, brightly lit waiting room where Sarah and Grandpa were pacing. His scrubs were wrinkled, and his face was carved with a grim, heavy seriousness. He didn't offer a polite greeting. He just held up a scan of my brain. "She has a large mass pressing aggressively against her left frontal lobe," the surgeon said, his voice clipped and urgent. "The internal pressure is massive. It's causing her brain to herniate, to push against the skull. If we don't get her into an operating room and cut her open in the next 20 minutes, she will either die on the table, or she will wake up entirely brain dead. Do you understand?" "Operate," Grandpa said instantly, stepping forward. "Do whatever it takes. Are you the next of kin?" The surgeon looked at his clipboard. "We need the parents' immediate consent for the surgical liability release. It's a high-risk procedure." Sarah's hands were shaking so violently, she dropped her phone twice before unlocking it. First call to Dad. First ring, second ring, straight to voicemail. Second call to Mom, straight to voicemail. Third call to Jessica, voicemail. "Please," Sarah begged into the phone, sobbing uncontrollably right there in the waiting room. "Please, somebody pick up. Chloe collapsed. She has a brain tumor. They're cutting her head open right now. You have to call us back." Grandpa Arthur didn't panic. Sarah told me his eyes went totally dark, his expression shifting into the terrifying dead calm of a man watching a building burn down. He pulled out his own phone. He bypassed the cell networks entirely and called the airline's elite concierge desk, using his decades-old business status to force a message directly to the gate agent in New York. It took 3 agonizing minutes of holding, the ticking clock echoing in the quiet hospital hallway, before he finally got Richard on the line. In the background of the call, Sarah could clearly hear the automated airport intercom. Final boarding call for Flight 402 to Rome. She could hear Jessica laughing about something. She could hear the rustle of expensive luggage. "Dad?" Dad's voice was instantly annoyed, breathless from rushing. "We're literally at the gate. We're boarding the plane right now. This better be really quick." "Richard?" Grandpa said. His voice was freezing cold. "Listen to me very carefully. Chloe collapsed on stage. She has a massive brain tumor. She is going into emergency neurosurgery right now to save her life. I need your verbal consent for the surgeon." A heavy static-filled silence fell over the line. For 5 seconds the only sound was the distant hum of the airport terminal. Then unbelievably, my father let out a long heavy sigh. It wasn't a gasp of horror. It was a sigh of utter exhaustion. "Dad? Come on," Dad muttered, lowering his voice as if Grandpa were embarrassing him. "Is this her trying to ruin Jessica's trip? A tumor? Are you serious? Yesterday she just had a headache. It's probably a stress cyst or a panic attack, because we didn't go to graduation. She always overreacts to get attention." Sarah said. Grandpa's face turned to carved stone. The grip he had on his phone was so tight his knuckles were stark white. "Your daughter's brain is bleeding, Richard," Grandpa whispered, every word a sharp knife. "She is dying. If you get on that plane she might be gone before you cross the ocean." "Dad, the flight is 14 hours. Dad's tone became fiercely defensive, rationalizing his own terrifying selfishness. "Even if it is surgery, by the time we land, whatever minor procedure it is will be over. We can't do anything from 35,000 feet in the air. We are getting on this plane. I'll call you from Italy when we land." Click. The dial tone hummed loudly in the quiet hospital waiting room. He hung up. He chose his oldest daughter's vacation over his youngest daughter's life. Grandpa slowly lowered the phone. He stared at the blank screen for a long moment. "If you get on that plane," Grandpa whispered to the dead air, "you are dead to me." He didn't waste another second. He turned sharply to the waiting surgeon, pulled out the printed university emergency form I had updated 3 days ago, the one where I had listed him as my primary contact, and slapped it onto the clipboard. He signed the heavy stack of surgical consent forms himself, his handwriting sharp and angry. 10 minutes later, I was wheeled into a freezing operating room. The blinding surgical lights snapped on above me. A nurse was already shaving off my dark hair. A surgical drill rested on a metal tray, waiting to tear through my skull. As the anesthesia finally flooded my veins, pulling me down into the heavy, dreamless dark, I had two people fighting for me in the waiting room, my best friend and my grandfather. And somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, settling comfortably into their plush first-class seats, my parents were ordering pre-flight champagne, leaving me behind in the dark. I woke up 4 days later. The transition wasn't gentle. I didn't slowly flutter my eyes open to soft music. I was dragged up from the heavy, suffocating darkness by the sharp, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the biting smell of medical bleach. The first thing I saw was a painfully bright, sterile white ceiling. The second thing I saw was Grandpa Arthur. He was fast asleep in an incredibly uncomfortable, rigid plastic chair. He was still wearing the exact same suit from my graduation, now deeply wrinkled and hanging loosely on his frame. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 4 days. The third thing I saw was Sarah. She was curled into a tight ball on a small, narrow hospital cot against the wall, her dark hair a tangled mess. She looked like she hadn't slept a full hour in a decade. I tried to speak. My brain sent the command, but my throat was painfully dry, scraped raw by the breathing tube they had recently removed. Water, I tried to say. It came out as nothing more than a broken, dry rasp, but in the quiet room, it was as loud as a gunshot. Sarah snapped awake instantly. Her eyes darted around wildly before landing on the bed. They widened in absolute shock. Chloe. She leaped up, knocking her knee against the metal bed frame, and slammed her hand onto the nurse call button. Tears instantly spilled over her dark, exhausted circles. Oh my God. You're awake. You're actually awake. The sudden noise startled Grandpa. He jerked awake, his hand instinctively flying to his chest. When his tired eyes focused and he saw me looking back at him, the strongest, most stoic man I had ever known completely broke. He dropped his face into his calloused hands and wept. The deep, shaking sobs of a man who had been holding his breath for 96 hours. My girl, he whispered, standing up on shaking legs and leaning over the bed rails to press a trembling kiss to my bandaged forehead. My brave, stubborn girl. What happened? I managed to croak out. I tried to lift my hand to touch my head, but my arm felt like it was made of solid lead. Thick, heavy layers of gauze were wrapped tightly around my skull. The left side of my head felt strangely cold and completely numb. You had a tumor, Sarah said carefully. She reached through the rails and grabbed my hand, her grip fiercely protective. A really big one. It was pressing on everything. But the surgeon said it was benign. They got it all out, Chloe. You're going to be okay. You are safe. 4 days? I whispered, my eyes tracking to the dry erase whiteboard on the wall opposite my bed. The date written in black marker was completely wrong. I've been asleep for 4 days? Grandpa nodded grimly, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. I turned my head slowly, fighting a sudden vicious wave of nausea. I saw my phone resting on the bedside table, connected to a white charging cable. The screen was dark. My parents, Sarah and Grandpa, exchanged a look. It wasn't a look of relief. It was a dark, heavy, terrifying look. The kind of look people share before delivering a death sentence. Sarah reached for the phone, hesitating. She slowly handed it to me. Chloe, maybe you shouldn't look right now. Just rest. But my numb fingers were already unlocking the screen. I tapped the Instagram icon. And there it was, at the very top of my feed, posted exactly 12 hours ago. While I was lying in a hospital bed with a shaved head and a row of metal staples holding my skull together, fighting to open my eyes. A perfectly filtered photo of my entire family. Mom, Dad, Jessica, and Brandon. They were standing in front of the ancient, towering walls of the Colosseum at sunset. They all held colorful cones of gelato, wide, carefree, blinding smiles on every single face. The caption below it felt like a physical blow to the chest. Family trip in Rome. Finally, no stress, no drama. Just us. Blessed family time. 3112 likes. 45 comments. All from their wealthy friends, gushing about how perfect and beautiful they looked. Not one single mention of me. Not a single prayer emoji. Nothing. For years I had been trying to make sense of my family's behavior, studying them like a complex text, searching for some hidden deeper meaning behind their neglect. But looking at that photo, I finally analyzed the logical flaws in their story. There was no deep, complex reason. It was just a badly written script where I was never meant to be a real character. I was just the extra they cut from the final scene to save money. They know, Grandpa said softly. His voice trembled with a terrifying icy rage. I called Richard the minute their plane landed in Italy 4 days ago. I told him the surgery took 6 hours. I told him you were in a coma. I told him the surgeon didn't know if you would ever wake up. I stared at the photo. No stress, no drama. That was what I amounted to. My brush with death was just a dramatic inconvenience they had successfully avoided. I locked the phone. I didn't cry. The part of me that used to cry for their love, the part that would have shattered into a million pieces, felt like it had been surgically removed along with the tumor. I just felt a cold, absolute emptiness. I handed the phone back to Sarah. "Grandpa," I said. My voice was suddenly very steady, the rasp barely noticeable. "You said you had a gift, from Grandma." Grandpa's eyes flashed with a dark, dangerous light. He reached down into his leather briefcase by his chair and pulled out the thick manila envelope I had seen him holding in the graduation crowd. "Your grandmother," he began, his voice hard and precise, "knew your mother was deeply insecure, and she knew your father was a weak, easily manipulated man. Before she died, just a few weeks after you were born, she quietly set up a trust, a freedom fund." He placed the envelope gently on my lap. "She funded it with a massive amount of stock from her own family's company. It has been sitting there, growing, multiplying, untouched for 24 years. It was strictly, legally bound by ironclad contracts to transfer directly to your name, and your name only, on the exact day you graduated college." My breath caught in my throat. The heart monitor beeped a little faster. "How much?" Grandpa leaned in and named a figure. My heart completely stopped. The number echoed in my hollow head. It wasn't just pay off my student loans money. It wasn't just cover my rent money. It was buy a house in cash money. It was never worry about survival again money. It was total, absolute freedom. "I was supposed to hand you this envelope right after you walked across that stage," Grandpa said softly. "But when Sarah showed me that Instagram post this morning," he paused. A dark, terrifying satisfaction crossed his weathered face. "I called your father at his luxury hotel in Rome. I told him 2 things. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "First, I told him you survived the night. Second, I told him that I was executing the transfer of Margaret's multi-million-dollar trust fund exclusively into your private bank account. And I made sure he understood that neither he, nor your mother, nor Jessica would ever see a single penny of it, or my own estate, as long as I draw breath." I stared at him, the shock radiating through my bruised, battered body. "You told them about the money, while they were on vacation." "I did." Grandpa's smile was entirely devoid of warmth. "Let's see exactly how long it takes for them to suddenly care about your health now." The silence in the room stretched out, thick and heavy with anticipation. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up on the bedside table, vibrating violently against the plastic. "Incoming call, Dad." I just looked at it. The screen glared in the dim room. I let it ring. Missed call. 2 seconds later. "Incoming call, Dad." I let it ring again. Missed call. Over the next 2 hours, my phone became a chaotic weapon. It buzzed and flashed incessantly. 82 missed calls, 31 rapid-fire text messages. "Dad, Chloe, answer your phone. This is an emergency. Call me back immediately. Dad, pick up the phone. Grandpa is acting crazy. We need to talk about this fund. Mom, honey, please call your father. We are so worried about you and this misunderstanding. Jessica, Chloe, what the hell did you tell Grandpa? Dad is freaking out about some trust fund. Call us right now." I read the notifications as they popped up, feeling a sick, twisted knot form in my stomach. Not one single message asked how my brain surgery went. Not one asked if I was in pain, or if I could see, or if I could speak. Just pure, unadulterated panic. Panic over losing control. Panic over the massive pile of money they suddenly realized they weren't entitled to. "They're coming back," Grandpa said quietly, watching the screen light up for the 83rd time. "I guarantee you. They are packing their bags and speeding to the airport right now." They arrived the next afternoon. The sky outside my hospital window was a bruised, heavy gray, perfectly matching the atmosphere in the room. The rain beat softly against the thick glass. Inside, the only sound was the steady, rhythmic beep of my heart monitor. I lay perfectly still, staring at the door. As a literature major, I had spent my entire academic life studying character motivations, dissecting tragic flaws, and analyzing the climax of great plays. Now I was waiting for the final act of my own. I heard them before I saw them. The frantic sharp click 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 of Mom's expensive heels echoed down the sterile hospital corridor, cutting through the quiet like a knife. "Which room?" I heard her breathless voice demand outside the door. "Hayes, Chloe Hayes." Sarah instantly stood up from her chair in the corner, her jaw set, her fists clenching at her sides. She looked like a soldier preparing for war. "I should get security," she whispered, her eyes darting to the door. "No," I said softly, the morphine dulling the edges of my physical pain, leaving my mind terrifyingly clear. "Let them in." The heavy wooden door burst open. Mom swept into the room first. Her face was perfectly arranged into a flawless mask of maternal terror. Her eyes were wide, her mouth formed into a tragic old, "Chloe. Baby. Oh my God." She rushed toward the bed, her arms reaching out to swallow me in a hug I hadn't received since I was a toddler. I didn't raise my arms. I didn't lean forward. I lay perfectly, rigidly still against the pillows. "Don't touch me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Mom froze in midair, hovering awkwardly over the bed. Her hands trembled, slowly dropping to her sides. "We came as fast as we could," she gasped, her eyes darting to Grandpa, checking to see if he was buying her performance. "You came as fast as you could," I repeated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I studied her face, watching the tiny micro-expressions of guilt and calculation twitch around her eyes. 6 days after my skull was sawed open. The flights must have been terribly booked, though Instagram says you had plenty of time to tour the Vatican yesterday. Mom's face flickered. The tragic mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the panicked, defensive woman underneath. We couldn't do anything from over there." Dad entered the room right behind her. He looked completely disheveled, deeply jet-lagged, and profoundly nervous. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, his eyes shifting everywhere in the room except to my bandaged head. Then Jessica walked in. The sheer absurdity of the moment hit me like a physical wave. Jessica walked into an intensive care unit, actually carrying 2 massive glossy designer shopping bags from Milan. The heavy paper rustled loudly in the quiet room, an insulting sound of wealth and total disregard. "Hey Chloe," Jessica sighed, stopping at the foot of my bed. She finally looked at me, taking in the bruised hollows of my eyes, the pale gray of my skin, and the thick bloody bandages wrapping my skull. She grimaced, taking a half step back as if my illness were contagious. "Wow, you look intense. I heard they had to shave your head. That is so crazy." She casually set the heavy shopping bags down on the linoleum floor. "Anyway, we cut the trip completely short, so you're welcome." In the corner of the room, Sarah made a low, dangerous sound, a sound like a cornered animal about to attack. "Jessica," I said calmly, feeling my heartbeat remain perfectly steady on the monitor. "I nearly died." "I know." She crossed her arms defensively, rolling her eyes. "But you didn't. You're sitting right here, and Grandpa is threatening to bankrupt us or something over it. It's a huge overreaction." "Arthur," Mom interrupted, turning her back to me entirely. She faced Grandpa, who was standing tall by the window, his hands resting on his cane. "This is a private family matter. We need to discuss this trust fund logically. Chloe just had major brain surgery. She clearly isn't in her right mind to handle complex finances right now." "She is in perfect mind," Grandpa said. His voice was like cracking ice. It filled the room, heavy and dangerous. "And the money is already in her account. The transfer cleared an hour ago." Dad went completely pale. He grabbed the back of the visitor's chair to steady himself. "Dad, you can't do that. That money belongs to the family. That money belongs to Chloe." Grandpa roared, taking a sudden powerful step forward. The sheer volume made Dad physically flinch. "For 24 years I sat back and watched you treat this brilliant girl like she was an unpaid servant in her own home. You denied her the tuition money that I offered you. You made her work herself to the bone while you bought Jessica cars and European vacations. You left her to die on a stage so you could eat gelato in Rome. We love Chloe," Mom screamed, tears finally springing to her perfectly made-up eyes. "How dare you? You love what she does for you." Grandpa snapped back, his cane hitting the floor like a judge's gavel. "You want to prove me wrong? Fine. Tell me, Richard. Tell me right now. When is Chloe's birthday?" Dad froze. He blinked, completely stunned by the question. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His eyes darted to Mom in a blind panic. It's in May. No, June." The silence in the room became agonizing. It stretched tight, suffocating the air. "November 12th, I said quietly from the bed. "It's November 12th, Dad. He looked down at his shoes, his face burning a dark, shameful red. "What's her favorite color?" Grandpa demanded, relentlessly pushing the blade in. "What is the exact title of her major? What is the name of her best friend standing right there?" He pointed a shaking finger at Sarah. Complete, unbroken silence. The monitor beeped. Beep, 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 beep. "You flew back for the money," I said. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, holding her gaze. "Just admit it. Stop performing. For once in your life, just tell the truth." Mom stared at me. Her chest heaved. I could see the desperate gears turning in her head, trying to find a way to spin the narrative, trying to find a lie that would save her pride. And then, something finally snapped. The polite upper-middle-class facade she had worn my entire life crumbled into dust. "You want to know the truth?" she hissed. Her face twisted into something ugly, raw, and deeply bitter. "Fine. You want the truth? Pat, don't," Dad warned, grabbing her arm, his voice trembling with fear. She violently shook him off. "No. He wants truth, I'll give it to him." She stepped closer to the bed, glaring down at me. All the fake maternal warmth vanished, replaced by decades of venom. "You want to know why I kept my distance, Chloe? Why I could never look at your face without feeling totally exhausted?" I said nothing. I just waited. I analyzed her, watching the antagonist of my story finally reveal her hidden motive. "Because every single time I look at your face, I see her." She pointed a shaking, furious finger directly at Grandpa Arthur. "I see Margaret." Grandpa went perfectly, terrifyingly still. "The first time I met this family," Mom continued, her voice trembling with the ghosts of 30-year-old insults, "Margaret looked at me like I was trash. She spent years making snide, polite little comments about my background, about my cheap clothes, about how Richard could do so much better. She made me feel incredibly small, worthless, and then, she died." Mom laughed, a wet, bitter, haunting sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. And I thought, finally, I'm free. I can be the matriarch. I can be accepted in this house without someone breathing down my neck. She leaned over the bed rails, staring so deeply into my eyes I could see the broken, insecure woman trapped inside her. "But then you were born, and as you grew, you looked exactly like her. The same dark eyes, the same hair, the same judgmental, stubborn chin. Every single time I looked at my own daughter, I saw the ghost of the woman who hated me, judging me from inside my own house." The room was dead silent. The rain tapped against the glass. "That's not Chloe's fault," Sarah said fiercely, stepping forward, her voice thick with tears of rage. "She was a baby. She was your child." "I know that," Mom shrieked, finally breaking down into loud, ugly sobs. She covered her face with her hands. "I know, but I couldn't help it. I couldn't love you the same way I loved Jessica. I just couldn't." I looked at the woman crying violently at the foot of my hospital bed. For years I had thought this exact moment, the moment I finally found out why I wasn't loved, would destroy me. I thought it would break my heart permanently. But instead, a profound, overwhelming clarity washed over me. The massive, crushing stone I had been carrying for 24 years simply dissolved. The deep, ingrained belief that I was unlovable, that I was fundamentally flawed, that I just hadn't worked hard enough to earn my place at the table. It all vanished. It was never about me. It was never about my grades, or my chores, or my resilience. It was about a frightened, insecure woman projecting her own trauma onto a child. "Mom," I said. My voice was incredibly steady, ringing clearly through the quiet, sterile room. "I understand now. You were deeply hurt by my grandmother. You felt inadequate and judged." She peeked through her fingers, her breath hitching, waiting for my anger. "But I am not Margaret," I continued softly. "I was an innocent child who just wanted her mother to look at her." She covered her face again, sobbing louder. "For 24 years, I said, ignoring the dull throbbing returning to my skull, I did everything right. I got perfect grades. I caused no trouble. I worked 3 jobs so you wouldn't be burdened by my existence. I planned the parties. I cleaned the messes. I thought if I just shrank myself down small enough and worked hard enough, you would finally see me." I took a slow, deep breath. "But you were never going to see me. You were always going to see a ghost." I slowly turned my eyes to Dad. He shrank back against the wall. "And you knew exactly why she treated me this way. You knew, and you did absolutely nothing. You let her emotionally neglect a child because it was easier than going to therapy or standing up to your wife. You sacrificed my childhood for peace in your living room." Dad was crying now, silent tears tracking down his jet-lagged face. "Chloe, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to fix it. So you left me to die on a stage instead, I stated, completely emotionally detached. He flinched as if I had physically struck him across the face. I don't hate you, I said, looking at all three of them, taking in the ruins of my family. But I am done. I am done being the invisible pillar holding up this family. I am done trying to earn a love that should have been free. I shifted my gaze to Jessica. She was staring at me, her face pale, the designer shopping bags completely forgotten on the floor. And Jessica, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, firm warning. Keep the ring. Keep the luxury lifestyle. But know this. The next time you break something, or the next time you need someone to pick up the pieces of your life, do not look for me. Chloe. The money, Dad started, his voice pathetic and desperate, still unable to let go of the one thing he truly valued. The money is mine, I said firmly, cutting him off. Grandma left it for me because she knew exactly who you people were. It's staying with me. I'm going to use it to heal my brain, to buy a home, and to build a life completely, entirely independent of you. You're tearing this family apart, Jessica whispered, stepping back toward the door. No, I said, closing my heavy eyes, suddenly overwhelmingly tired but deeply, finally at peace. I'm just finally leaving the ruins. 3 years later, the afternoon sun streamed through the large heavy windows of my classroom, catching the dust motes as they danced slowly in the quiet air. The final bell had just rung, sending a wave of chaotic, joyful energy out into the hallways. I stood alone in the sudden silence, wiping down the whiteboard. My left hand moved smoothly, grasping the eraser with perfect strength, a small daily miracle I swore I would never take for granted again. I paused, running my fingers through my long, dark, wavy hair, briefly tracing the faint, raised line of the surgical scar hidden beneath it. It was my permanent reminder, the physical price of my freedom. 9th grade English. Ms. Hayes was painted neatly in black lettering on the heavy wooden door. My classroom was my sanctuary. The bookshelves were meticulously lined with worn classics. A cozy reading nook sat in the corner with soft beanbags, and a massive, vibrant bulletin board covered the back wall. It read in bright, bold letters, "Every voice matters here." I had lost my words once. I knew the absolute terror of a silenced mind, the panic of wanting to speak and finding nothing but dark, empty space. Now I spent my life making sure these teenagers knew exactly how to use theirs. My phone vibrated against the wooden surface of my desk, breaking the stillness. Wednesday, 5 p.m. Dad. He called every Wednesday, without fail. It had taken a year of total absolute silence, and another year of heavily guarded emails, before I finally allowed these weekly 15-minute phone calls. I took a deep breath, grounding myself, and tapped answer. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, sweetie." His voice came through the speaker. It was tentative, deeply careful, like a man handling cracked glass. He sounded so much older now. "How are you? How was school today?" "Good. The kids are reading To Kill a Mockingbird. They're really starting to get into it." "That's wonderful, Chloe. Truly. You always were such a brilliant reader." A long, heavy pause settled over the line. In the past, this kind of silence would have sent me into a panic, desperately trying to fill the void to keep him comfortable. Now, I just let it sit there. I let him carry the weight of the conversation. "I actually wanted to share some news with you," he finally said, clearing his throat nervously. "Your mother and I finished our 6-month intensive therapy program today." I leaned back against my desk, looking out the window at the empty parking lot. "How did it go?" "Hard," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "It was incredibly hard. She's unpacking a lot of trauma regarding my mother. And I am facing the fact that my cowardice cost me my daughter. It's a very long road, Chloe. But we're trying. We really are." "I know you are, Dad," I said softly. And I meant it. "Thanks for the update." We talked for 5 more minutes about the weather and my garden. It was superficial, but it was safe. Boundaries are a beautiful, life-saving thing. I had used a fraction of Grandma Margaret's Freedom Fund to buy a cozy 2-bedroom house with a wraparound porch and heavy wooden doors that locked securely. I paid off my terrifying medical bills in a single day. I invested the rest safely. My parents hadn't been to my house. They weren't allowed to ask for money, but they were allowed to know me, slowly, from a safe distance, as long as they respected the walls I had built. Jessica had called me last month. It was the first time we had spoken in 2 years. Brandon had left her. It turned out a family that actively abandons their youngest daughter in a brain surgery ICU ward to eat gelato in Europe isn't exactly the kind of public relations a wealthy, image-obsessed banking family wants. The Hastings family quietly called off the wedding. Jessica had broken down on the phone with me, crying so hard she was hyperventilating. She apologized, admitting that her own therapist pointed out she was deeply, viciously jealous of my competence because she felt utterly useless without our parents' money defining her worth. I listened to her cry. I empathized with her pain, but for the first time in my entire life I didn't offer to fix her problem. I didn't absorb her mess. I told her I wished her the best, and I hung up. It was the healthiest conversation we had ever had. The heavy wooden door to my classroom creaked open. Grandpa Arthur walked in. He moved slower these days, leaning heavily on a beautifully carved wooden cane, his silver hair thinner than before, but his dark eyes were as bright, sharp, and full of life as ever. Sarah was right behind him, carrying 2 massive iced coffees in cardboard carriers. "There's my favorite teacher." Grandpa smiled, his voice rumbling warmly as he looked around the bright, colorful room with immense pride. "Hey, Grandpa." I walked over and hugged him tight. He smelled exactly as he always did, a comforting mix of peppermint, old books, and safety. "I brought you something," he said, stepping back and reaching into the inner pocket of his heavy wool coat. He pulled out a delicate, slightly yellowed envelope. "I was saving this for a rainy day, but the sun is shining, and I think you're finally ready to read it." I took the envelope carefully. The paper felt fragile, dry with age. My name, Chloe, was written on the front in elegant looping cursive. "Your grandmother wrote that the day she came home from the hospital after you were born," Grandpa said softly, placing his calloused hand over mine. "She knew she was sick. She knew her heart was failing, and she knew she wouldn't live to see you grow up." With shaking hands, I carefully broke the brittle seal. I pulled out a single sheet of stationery. "My dearest Chloe, I am holding you as I write this. You are so small, but you already have my eyes. I know the world is going to be hard, and I fear deep in my soul that Patricia's pain and insecurities will make it harder for you in this house. Please forgive her for her brokenness, but never ever let her diminish you. I leave you my spirit, my stubbornness, and a fund that will ensure you never have to beg for a seat at any table. You build your own table, my brave girl. Surround yourself with people who see your light, not just the warmth you provide them. I will love you until the end of time. Love, Grandma Margaret." Tears, hot and fast, blurred my vision, dropping quietly onto the aged paper. But they weren't tears of grief. They weren't the desperate, hollow tears I used to cry in the dark of my childhood bedroom. They were tears of profound, overwhelming peace. I looked up at Grandpa, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. I looked at Sarah, who was smiling at me over her coffee cup, her eyes shining with quiet understanding. The people who stayed. The people who saw me when I was completely invisible to the rest of the world. I used to think love was a harsh transaction, something you had to earn through blood and exhaustion. You work hard, you sacrifice your own happiness, you bleed for people, and in return they might throw you a tiny crumb of affection. I had spent 24 years performing a flawless routine for an audience that had their eyes completely closed. Now I knew the truth. Love isn't something you beg for. Love is the person who sits awake in a hard plastic chair in the waiting room while your skull is cut open. Love is the friend who calls just to ask if you remembered to eat dinner. Love is someone who sees you for exactly who you are, without needing you to be useful, without needing you to be silent. If you are listening to this and you are in a situation like mine, if you are the glass child, the invisible pillar, the one who gives and gives until you are hollow and shaking, hear me right now. Stop setting yourself on fire to keep people warm who won't even acknowledge the flame. You are allowed to step off the stage. You are allowed to take your dignity, pack your bags, and walk away into the dark. Building your own table is terrifying and lonely at first, but I promise you, the food tastes so much better when you don't have to beg just to be seated. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. Sharing a narrative with this much raw truth and intensity is never easy, but stories with this kind of depth deserve to be heard. If Chloe's courage to finally set a boundary resonated with you, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. By staying connected, we can continue to share more powerful, deeply human stories like this one. Remember, the most important person in the world who needs to see your worth is you. I'll see you in the next story.